We are in Mark chapter 12. We are going through what God expects of His people. Of all of the things of the Bible, what's the number one thing that God expects? And we've been covering that for the last 4 weeks. So if you'll stand with me, let's read the passage, Mark chapter 12, starting with verse 28. Then one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, "Which is the first commandment of all?" Jesus answered him, "The first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And this is the first commandment. And the second is like it. And is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." So the scribe said to him, "Well said, teacher, you have spoken the truth. For there is one God, and there is no other but He." You may be seated. Thank you. As we have been going through this, we've taken apart each section of what Jesus specifically said. Jesus didn't just say, "I want you to love me with everything that you have." That's not all that He said. He specifically went through by points of your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. He wanted you specifically to know that your heart has the ability, the capability to love Him with all of it. If not, think about it, how bad would that be? There would be no hope for us if God gave us a commandment that we could not fulfill, correct? Without a chance, we'd just all be ushered right into hell. But God gives us this law to tell us that our hearts have the capabilities of loving Him with all of it. Now, He goes into specifics, and as we've mentioned, each one there has been crossover and there's been blending, because although they are distinctly separate, they do have common qualities. And the first one we talked about is the heart. It's the inside of us. It's the, if you want to call it this, the internal storage container of your soul. In your internal storage container, you contain your emotions. John chapter 16, verse 22. All of the emotions that are in you are stored in your heart. As just like we might have way too much junk in our house and we have to put it in a storage container, all of your emotions are in this storage container. All of your cravings, whether it's for food or some other different craving that we all have. Proverbs chapter 24 verse 2, all of our cravings are stored in our heart. All of our drives, what pushes us on, what we go for. Psalm 119 verse 10, all of our passions, what mean the most to us, our focus. Mark chapter 7 verses 21 through 23. By the way, from Mark chapter 7 verses 21 through 23, you don't want those. You don't want those passions. Those are bad passions to have in your heart. And also the wisdom and understanding of what you have. All of it. Your information that you have gathered since you were a baby to where you are right now is all stored in your heart. Then we talked about our soul, and that the soul is our whole being. It's not just the internal part of us. It's not just the spiritual part of us. It's also our body. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. It's both the spiritual and the physical together united as one. Our soul has the ability to rule over our physical and over our spiritual sides. I've said it over and over again while we've been going through this series, but I'm going to say it one more time before we end. You are not the product of your body. you don't have to fulfill what your body tells you to do. If it did, we'd all overeat and oversleep. You're not a product of your body. But you're also not a product of the drives that are in your heart. And I don't know about you, but I'm real glad for that. Because some of the drives of my heart, I'd be in prison for life. Because there's a few people I've wanted to murder along the way. We're not a product of our heart. We have the choice to overrule their drives, whether it's our physical or our spiritual. But I want you to know, since you have the ability to overrule those choices, you are also responsible for the choices that you make in overruling them. If you fail to overrule them when you ought, you are responsible for that choice. Okay. That was the soul. The next one that we talked about last week was our mind. And our mind is the processing plant of our inside thoughts and our outside actions. When we weigh in our mind, when we think about all of the facts that we have over a situation, whether the facts are right or not, and when we weigh how our body feels and what our body wants, we weigh that in our mind. That decision is taking place in our mind, and it is the doors to whatever comes out of our life. What your mind decides is what is produced out of your body. If you decide that I'm getting up in the morning, I'm getting up in the morning. This morning was a rough one. I didn't feel like getting up in the morning. But I chose that I'm going to wake up in the morning. You're probably not happy about that either, but that's okay. Whether it's our physical or our spiritual, our mind is the door to our decisions. Whether you rule with your body's feelings or your spirit's feelings, that is made in your mind. So that brings us to the last one. As we've been going through, if you were here on Friday night, 2 weeks ago, we talked about it. The architecture of the tabernacle is what that little image is. On the outside is our body. On the inside, you have your spirit and you have your heart, your thoughts. Then there's your mind that are the door. Whatever comes out of that door is your actions. And your actions can be God-centered and focused, I would hope so, but they don't have to be. And that is the strength that Jesus was talking about when he said to love God with all your strength. Strength is the extension of the thoughts and the intents of our hearts filtered through our mind. You fill your mind with all kinds of thoughts and ideas. Your strength is what is produced from that. When your mind lets it go, it's what you get. It's what we actually do when our minds decide. And don't we all wish we were a little better at that? Our strength is our will in action. When we do something in our strength, it takes work, blood, sweat, and tears. Or it's not strength. You can't love God with all of your strength and it costs you nothing. David said that. If it is a sacrifice that doesn't cost you anything, you haven't done it with all your strength. If you haven't sweat a little bit when you're working, you haven't really worked. If you haven't struggled over a decision of what to do, you haven't really decided. This is your strength. This is not just enveloped in our physical prowess or abilities. This is absolutely everything in our lives. What Jesus covers here is not just if you can lift 100 pounds or you can only lift a gallon of milk. This is your financial abilities, your influence abilities. I remember hearing one of our general superintendents. In the Nazarene Church, we have 6 people that cover the entire Nazarene denomination around the world. And I remember hearing one of Gustavo Crocker's sermons. And he was from over in Cape Verde anyways. And as he was a young pastor, and they were trying to get a building for their church. But the government over there would not let them get the permits. And they gave them problem after problem after problem. And Pastor Crocker at that time was, I just don't know what to do. I've done all I can. And this little lady in the church, the prayer warrior, came up and said, Pastor, don't worry about it. By Monday, it'll be taken care of. Well, this is Sunday. She had one whole day. What's this little old lady going to do? Well, she went to her knees. By Monday morning, the problem person in the government, it came out on Sunday that he was doing nefarious things and was thrown completely out of office. And by the end of that week, they had their permit. She was a good one to have on your side praying. You know what? All of us have that ability. All of us have that strength, if you want to call it that. You have an influence in the world around you just because you have God's presence inside you. It's not just that you have the ability to lift or the ability to pay out on a bill or something along those lines. This is everything in your life. Every decision you make, Jesus says, I want you to love me with all of it. So let's talk about the two words. In the Greek, the word is ikus. It means, and it's the word that Jesus used here, it's your might, your ability. This is your doing part. It takes energy and work, as we mentioned before. To love God with all your strength or your ability, guess what? You have to do something. You can't just sit there and do nothing and say you're doing it. What Jesus mentions earlier are the internal parts of you. And he says, when on the internal parts of you, I want you to love me with all of those. I want you to love me with your thoughts. I want you to love me with your decisions. And here he says, I want you to actually show it. I want you to do something. I will leave that just right there. Probably should leave that there. In the Hebrew, the word is meod. It's to love God with your muchness. Genesis chapter 131, I should say. The word meod is used when God creates everything. He said it's good. And then he gets to the end and he says it's meod good. It's very good. It's used in the Old Testament over 300 times. But it doesn't mean strength. Jesus was quoting the Shema from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. And he used the word strength, and it's translated strength, but that's the only place. All of the other times, how we would translate it is very, or a lot of, or much of. It's an adverb, not a noun. Our mind, our body, those are nouns. This, meod, is an adverb. It would be like having something very strong or having something very smart. The word, it just doesn't translate well for us English people. It's an adverb. When Cain was angry with his brother, the scripture says that he was not just angry, he was meod angry. He was very angry. And when the great flood overtook the world, it says the waters were meod powerful over the land. When you wanted to give something an extra amount of power, or the most power a word could have, you would say meod something. It's Jesus, in the New Testament, Jesus used it. He said, verily, verily, I say to you. And if he ever said that, when he had the verily, verily in front of it in the King James, you knew it was going to be on the final exam. This is the idea. Numbers chapter 14, verse 21, when the spies came back and talked about the land, the promised land, they said it was mayod good. Very, very good. This kind of loving God is not just one thing, like your heart or your mind or your soul. It's your muchness. It's absolutely everything. When Jesus was giving us the first commandment, he gave us specifics. I want you to love me with all of your heart, with all of your soul. And then he comes in and says, if there's anything missing in that, I want you to cover all your bases. Do it all. With all of your mayod doesn't isolate a specific way to love God, but it actually includes any possible method whatsoever. Now think about this. This is amazing. This is really cool. Because that means you can be sweeping the floor and showing your love for God. That means you can be doing the dishes, cleaning toilets, working on a roof, destroying somebody's deck and trying to put it back together like I did this week. That means I can do those things and love God with all that's in me. That's really neat. But here's the flip side of that. Because there's no specific ways given, there's also no specific excuses that will be taken on the final exam. You won't be able to use, well, I was gonna, but it doesn't work that way. Because then Jesus will say, well, okay, if you didn't love me there, well, what about this? Or what about this? Because you can love him in any way. You don't have any excuse of how not that you loved him. Does that make sense? We have a wonderful possibility, any potential of being able to love God with all that we are. That's fantastic. But on the flip side, if we're not loving God, there's no excuse for us. We have nothing that will be supported on that day of the final exam. You say, Pastor, oh, I know. Go to the next slide, Daniel. I know, but I'm just not perfect. There's some things I just couldn't do. I love this little quote. I'm a nobody. Nobody's perfect. Therefore, I am. No, we all know. None of us in here are perfect. Our outcomes may not be perfect. But our motives can be. And our motives should be. This last week, I was working on a guy's deck. There was lots of rot, so I had to tear a bunch of pieces out. And I went in and I fought over this word this morning. I have no idea why my brain wasn't working. But a ballast is the little piece of wood that goes up right. And they're spaced every 3.5 to 4 inches so that a little kid can't get their head stuck or fall through the railing. And I had to replace a bunch. So I went into Lowe's and I grabbed 7 of them. And they were all in the same pile. I took them all up and I'm screwing them off in the pouring rain the other day. And I'm really wanting to be done and be done quick. And I get to the second to last one and I put it in and I realize that it's shorter than all the rest of them because some fool, when they were putting materials back, decided to throw the short one in and a whole pile of long ones. My intentions were that I do a perfect job for Chris. I think the world of the guy. He's a really nice guy, and I don't want to do shabby work. But that's not how it worked out. I should have expected that there was some fool that was going to drop material off. I mean, I do plumbing, and so the plumbing pieces that are in Lowe's, if you're going to find a piece, it's going to take you an hour because people throw it like spaghetti in there. It's terrible. I should have known that I needed to check every piece, but I didn't think about it. My motives were right. My actions were failed. they were marred. They were wrong. I'm really glad that God looks on the heart, aren't you? Just because we're not perfect does not give us an excuse for our motives not being perfect. I'm about to get on a soapbox, okay? When I was preparing for this sermon, I heard a Bible teacher say this, that, well, none of us are ever perfect, and then proceeded for the next few minutes to give excuses of why he didn't have to do his best. Folks, that is flat out a lie of Satan. I get that our returns might not be what we expect, but our intentions of putting the money in there should be. We do everything 110%, and sometimes it comes out with an 80, but we do our best in everything we do. It's true that we may not be perfect, but our intentions, the intentions of our mind, what we let out, have to be. The older I get, I know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, there are some things physically that my mind wants me to do that my body does not allow me to. I get it. Here's the issue, though. We do not use our inabilities as an excuse to do nothing. That's wrong. You're like, oh, Pastor, come on, now hold up. If someone comes to you with a question, life or death, they need to know this answer. They come to you, what do you tell them? Nope, sorry, not my field of expertise. I'm not perfect at that, so I don't do it. And you let the person, you sit there and watch them die. I know it's a very terrible illustration. But we don't do that, do we? We say, no, hey, look, I don't know it. But maybe this doctor does. You know. I don't know it, but here's where I did my study on it. I've had several people ask me questions about the Bible. There's sometimes, guess what, your pastor doesn't know it all. Does that surprise you? It really shouldn't. If it does, you haven't been here long enough. Sometimes I don't know it all. And sometimes I don't know the answer. But I can tell you, I know where the answer is going to be found. And I'll tell you how I do my own study so that you can find it for yourself. Sometimes we're not perfect. But that is not an excuse for us to do nothing. If someone's starving to death, no, you can't buy them a house, but you might be able to buy them a meal. Now, are there going to be people that abuse that? Absolutely. Who's that's problem? Not yours. That's between you and God, and that's between them and God. Our imperfections are not an excuse for doing nothing. When we get to the final exam, he's not going to say, how perfect were you? What's he going to say? What did Jesus say he would say? What did you do? Who did you know? Folks, that's a scary thing. And if it's not, you're not listening. I'm by no means putting down the fact that there are some things that we would love to be able to do, but we are not gifted to do it. I totally get that. But what I'm trying to point out is that we err on the side of excuses more than we err on the side of failure. I'm a dying man as your pastor who will one day stand before his Creator. And I don't want you to use me as an excuse saying, well, Pastor said I didn't have to because I didn't know what to do. You're not going to use me as an excuse. My conscience is going to be clear. God has given you responsibilities, and you ought to do them. Don't use your imperfect abilities or the lack thereof as an excuse. All right, that's off my soapbox. Now, I want you to know, I'm now to the conclusion of my sermon. Don't all get excited because it's rather lengthy. Go to the next slide, Daniel. So how do we love God? In conclusion of our series, how do we love God with all of our heart? And this is a brief, very brief recap. Pick carefully what you think about and what you store in your hearts. Don't clutter it with a bunch of junk so that you can't find what's important when you need to. But further than that, don't degrade it by putting in stuff that should never be there in the first place. And you know what? Even your pastor was dealing with the Holy Spirit this week on that very issue. I was going to put something in and the Holy Spirit said, no, you're not doing that today. Yes, Lord. You're right. That doesn't belong there. Find ways to use your drives and your passions to show God love. We all have drives. We all have passions. Learn what they are. They're good things. They're things that God put in you. So use them for good and do it in a loving way to Him. I have a drive and a passion to teach and preach God's Word. That's what He placed in me. And I do it with all my heart. I probably do it, I study for it probably longer than I should, but I want to make sure when I get up here I don't say something foolish. It's my drive, it's my passion. So I do it. So find the ways, things that drive you and your passions, and use them to love God. Finally, with your heart, keep what is good and get rid of what is bad quickly. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is fair, whatever is pure, whatever is acceptable, whatever is commendable, if there is anything of excellence, if there is anything praiseworthy, keep thinking on these things. We love God with all of our heart when we accept and keep the good and we get rid of the bad quickly. How do we love God with all of our soul? We train our physical bodies to be in submission to the good that is in our spirit. Our spirit, if God is in our spirit, He gives us good things. Train your body to obey it. And on the other side of that, train your spirit to be in submission to your body. Because there's sometimes when you don't feel like doing something on the inside, but you know you have to. There's sometimes when you have to get up in the morning when it really doesn't feel like it. Train your body to do the good. Train your spirit to do the good. There will be times that your spirit has to drag our bodies along. There will be times when our body has to drag our spirit along. It's just the way it is. Don't allow your heart to lead you to sin. Make your body stop. In addiction, your heart's going to tell you you need this, you want this, it will help. Don't let your body go there. And don't allow your physical body to lead you to sin either. Because there's a lot of things in this world, this old nasty world, that says your body needs this, you want this, it'll help, and it don't. Don't follow the lusts of your flesh. So how do we love God with all of our mind? By rightly deciding between the facts that you have in your spirit and in your body. Make good decisions. Allow only the good to be released in your life. And keep God in your thoughts. And choose to be thankful. Romans chapter 1 is a vivid picture of what happens when you do not retain God in your thoughts and you're not thankful for what He does. And I'm not going to give the whole passage, but let's just go to verse 21. For although they knew God, they neither glorified Him as God nor gave thanks to Him. Instead, their thoughts were turned to worthless things, and their senseless hearts were darkened. Though claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images that looked like mortal human beings, birds, four-footed animals, and reptiles. For this reason, God delivered them into sexual impurity as they followed the lusts of their hearts and dishonored their bodies with one another. If we fail to keep God in our thoughts, and if we fail to be thankful for who He is and what He does, you can see where it leads. And verse 24, I just put in there for lack of time. There's a whole lot worse as it keeps going. Be thankful and keep him in your thoughts. How do we love God with all of our strength? Do whatever your mind has rightly decided to do with all your physical ability. And when I say rightly, I mean correctly, godly, righteously. Whatever your mind has righteously decided to do, do it with all your heart. Corinthians chapter 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, work at it wholeheartedly as though you were doing it for the Lord, not merely for people. Paul implies here that we do everything all the way for God. So we ought to do it for others. But we're talking about loving God with all of our strength. So we do it as much as we can, with our muchness, with our mayod, with everything we've got. If I'm going to do something for the Lord and show him love, I want to go all the way. We don't do it half-heartedly. Joseph in the Old Testament didn't do the slow run away from Potiphar's wife, hoping that she'd catch him and that he'd have an excuse. No, he fled. At the point of losing his outer garment, he fled. He did it all the way. You and I, we love God all the way, not half-heartedly. If our employers or our mates are unsatisfied with half-hearted work, why do we think God is, in light of what his Son has done for our redemption, why do you think he will accept anything less than 100%? If your wife or your husband won't let you do 50, why do you think God will let you do 50? When it cost his Son his very life. When it cost his Son leaving heaven to come to earth and be mocked and treated poorly. John Wesley was an Anglican minister in England. He started the Methodist movement, although he never left the Anglican Church. As an outworking of that, we are here. He said this: do all good that you can, by all means that you can, in all the ways that you can, in all of the places that you can, at all the times you can, to all of the people you can, as long as you can. I'd say that's pretty encompassing, don't you? And we're talking about loving God with everything we've got. I'd say that's pretty good. John Wesley was not a man to just say something and not back it up. He rode 250,000 miles on horseback. They asked him if he wanted to walk. He said, no thanks. He preached over 40,000 sermons. He preached several sermons a day, not 3 times a week. He published over 400 publications in his life. He was convinced that it was important for him personally to spread the gospel through relationships and to grow closer to God in those relationships. Would you stand with me? How are you loving God with all? With all your heart, your thoughts, with the decisions you make in your mind and your body. How are you loving God with all of your muchness? I don't know about you, but as I look at my life, I realize there's a few holes where there's a whole lot of more about me than about him. I make a whole lot more excuses about, well, I, instead of, well, God. This is not to be a convicting sermon. This is actually to be an encouraging one. Because you and I have the potential to love God with every area of our life. And God accepts it that way. How many of you have friends or maybe a spouse, and you do something for them and they're like, thanks, no big deal? Doesn't it grate on you? I mean, every ounce of energy that you use to give that love, to show that love, and they don't care about it? You see, it doesn't work that way with God. Because absolutely everything you do out of love for Him, He sees it. From the inside out, He sees it all, and He accepts it. And what's wild is, when we do it, we draw closer to Him from doing it. It's mind-boggling. So where can you grow? Pray with me. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.